Welcome to Audiorama Onda Lectora. Make yourself comfortable, listen, and enjoy this audiobook, Unlocking the Mind, The Power of Thought, by Henry Thomas Hamblin.
You are the architect of your own life. You can make it or break it. You are building with the power of your thoughts, but are you building well? The power of thought, as Emerson says, is a spiritual power. It is the greatest power which man has at his disposal. The world today is in its present state, simply as a result of the collective thought of all mankind. Every nation is in its present state of peace and prosperity, or of poverty, murder and anarchy, simply as a result of its thinking as a nation. And each individual is what he is, and his life is what it is, and his circumstances are what they are, simply as a result of his thoughts. What a man thinks, that is what he becomes. What a man thinks, is the mainspring of all his actions. What a man thinks, attracts to him his circumstances and his environment. What a man thinks, determines what kind of friends and companions will gather around him. What a man thinks, decides whether he will be happy or unhappy, successful or unsuccessful, healthy or unhealthy, prosperous or poor, hated or loved. What a man thinks, builds his character or sinks it. What a man thinks, can defeat fate or strengthen it, can align him with his glorious destiny, or make him an outcast and a wanderer, in deserted places. In fact, the power of thought has no limits, because it is a spiritual power of intense potency. It is the power that distinguishes man from the brute, it is the power by which he can ascend to God, it is the power that can make the unsuccessful, triumphant in the battle of life. It is the power that can make possible the highest achievement. It is the power by which difficulties can be overcome the disadvantages of birth and sonship, and beautify life, and inspire and invigorate it, with the powers that God has given. By thought, man blesses or curses himself. By him, he brings into his life success or failure, health or sickness, happiness or unhappiness, poverty or prosperity. It is all in your mind, and in the character of your thought. Whatever there is in your life or mine, of disharmony, lack, disease or unhappiness, is the result of our disharmonious thinking. We live in an ordered universe, but we do not react harmoniously to our environment, we are not in correspondence with the hidden law and order that surrounds us. It is not necessary for the universe to alter, what is necessary is that we change ourselves. Within ourselves is the cause of disorder in our own individual world, for each one lives in a small world of his own creation. So the disorder and the problems that afflict us, or the lack that restricts our life, can never be overcome, except by a change of mind, of habit of thought and mental attitude. In the following pages, an attempt is made to show how the reader can, by changing his thoughts and mental attitude, reverse the lever, and come into harmony with the divine idea. In doing so, his life will blossom like a rose, he will be led in peace, the mountains and the hills will rejoice at his passing, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Chapter 1. The thought, cause of action. There is the conscious mind, and there is the subconscious mind. The conscious mind collects knowledge and experiences through the senses. It learns from books, conversations and experience. It reasons and draws conclusions. Finally, his thoughts pass to the subconscious mind. The subconscious is the mind of action, and is responsible for everything we do. It is the seat of memory and instinct. It is a reservoir of tremendous power, of extraordinary intelligence, it carries out all the complicated processes within the body, which make life possible. The wisest and most erudite men cannot come to understand its marvelous powers, but in spite of this, we know enough about its functioning to be able to control it. And by controlling it, we control our actions, and by controlling our actions, we shape our life, and overcome what is called destiny. The subconscious mind, although so wonderfully intelligent and possessing extraordinary powers, acts entirely by suggestion. That is to say, it follows blindly and faithfully the thoughts that are sent to it. Therefore, on our thoughts depends the kind of actions that are produced. If bad thoughts are sent to the subconscious mind, the natural result will be bad and destructive action. If one has thoughts of weakness and failure, then inevitably, weak actions will be produced, leading to failure. On the other hand, if you have good thoughts, you will produce good constructive actions. And if you have strong, success-filled thoughts, you will produce robust, positive actions, which will lead to success and achievement. It is impossible to have bad thoughts and perform good actions. Many have tried. They have said, "I will be outwardly respectable and blameless in life, though I will secretly think this thought, embrace it in my bosom because it is pleasant. But I will not let it go any further, because I know that wrongdoing leads to shipwreck and disaster. That's why I will deceive even my best friends. Outwardly I will be all that I should be, but in my thoughts I will be evil. Mine will be a double life, to outsiders I will be one thing, and in my thought world something different. Thus I will be able to enjoy the evil in my thoughts, and escape its sorrows." Such a person does not count on the power and fidelity of the subconscious mind. Every bad thought that it entertains and gloats, acts as a powerful suggestion to this giant patient. Until at last he can stand it no longer, and bursts into life, in the form of a course of evil action, which is an exact replica of the thoughts that have been entertained. This explains why, so often, people who have always been exemplary in their conduct, suddenly go wrong and sink into ruin. They are simply reaping the harvest of their thoughts. While this is true, in the case of most of those who indulge in secret evil thoughts, there are those who, for lack of courage or opportunity, do not burst, or cannot burst, into evil action. With their evil thoughts, they arouse certain emotions, which cannot be satisfied and which, therefore, have to be repressed. The effect of repression is either a chronic disease, which no medical skill can cure, or an organic disease which is beyond the art of man to cure. The reader must not imagine, however, that all who suffer in this way, have been guilty of evil thoughts. But the practice is certainly one of the ways by which some people can, and do, literally destroy themselves. This example is given merely as an illustration of the effect of bad thinking, and most people have seen evidence of it, among their friends and relatives. Most of my readers will, no doubt, be above this kind of thought, but the same law acts with every kind of thought, which is sent to the subconscious mind. There are two kinds of thought, namely, constructive and destructive, sometimes called positive and negative. It depends on the kind of thought, which we persistently dwell and pass to the subconscious mind, what our actions in life are to be. If we allow our mind dwell on destructive, negative thoughts, and this, unfortunately, is often the case, as it does not require any effort, then destructive and negative action will be the inevitable result. On the other hand, if we have positive or constructive thoughts, and for this, effort is required, just as effort is required to climb a hill, then constructive action occurs, as a natural result. Thus, a man who indulges in hatred, and meditates on his grievances, will be induced to think of murder. And if he wallows in thoughts of murder, there will come a time, when he may attempt life. On the other hand, if the same man keeps his mind off his grievances, and thinks of forgiveness, or better still, if he loves, or keeps in thoughts of goodwill, the one who has wronged him, then his life will be happy and peaceful, and in its highest sense, will be successful. On the other hand, a man who indulges in weak and fearful thoughts, who fears that his business will fail, who fears that his luck will desert him, who fears that competition will arise, which he will be unable to cope with, will probably fail. Because all his actions will be weak and hesitant, and will lack the strength and decisiveness necessary to achieve success. On the other hand, if he banishes every weak negative thought, every thought of possible failure, and constantly reinforces his mind with affirmations of success, in other words, send strong suggestions of success to his subconscious mind. Then that man will succeed in life, because his actions will be strong and decisive. When he faces great difficulties, he will find that his subconscious mind will provide him with wonderful energy and staying power, great courage and determination. This happens simply because it has been trained by right thinking to meet those challenges. The mind, when nourished with positive and empowering thoughts, becomes an inexhaustible source of support and courage in difficult times. It would be possible to fill a book with illustrations of the operation of this law, but in a small work of this kind, these two should suffice. The law is immutable, it cannot be deceived or evaded. Whatever we think, is sooner or later converted into action, and as upon our actions our life depends, it will be seen that it is possible to govern our life, by the control of thought. For by controlling our thoughts, we govern our actions, by governing our actions, we shape our life and our circumstances, thus shaping our destiny. Life is not a matter of chance or luck, it is not something beyond our control, it is largely the result or effect of our thoughts. Therefore, by controlling our thoughts, and this, thank God, can be done, we can govern and direct our lives, to an almost unbelievable extent. As conscious thinking beings, created, according to the Bible, in the likeness and image of God, that is, a microcosm of the macrocosm, we possess one of the greatest powers in the universe, and this power is thought. The way we use this marvelous power will determine the course of our life. The machinist sends his engine backwards or forwards, although it is the same power, which is used in each case. In the same way, the thinking man can build or destroy himself, through the good or bad use, the potent power of thought. It depends on how he uses this power, whether for good or evil, whether his life is successful, healthy, happy, or harmonious, or whether it lacks definite achievement, true success and happiness. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Chapter 2. Victims of Ignorance. We do not believe that there are many, who deliberately have negative thoughts. Most people have good intentions, and want to do good and be good. But, however, most of us think bad, more or less, and this is due, we firmly believe, to ignorance. Since it is generally not known that negative thoughts are highly destructive, we indulge in them ignorantly, thinking that they do no harm. In reality, thoughts of impurity, anger, revenge, hatred, resentment, envy, thoughts of grievance, thoughts of sorrow, loss, and affliction. Thoughts of fear, failure, weakness, hardship, disease, decay, mortality and death are all highly destructive. They are destructive to health, to happiness, to circumstances, and to life in all its aspects. They destroy the nervous system, paralyze effort, sap the will, lead to wrong decisions. It will be admitted that this is a matter of paramount importance, and yet neither children nor the general public are instructed in these vital matters. Because of this almost universal ignorance, most of us continue to indulge in negative thinking, to our great detriment. How many of us, for example, realize that it is thought that kills, and not lack of food, in most cases of death by supposed starvation? However, a person who fasts voluntarily, to cure himself of some organic disease, may do so. If fasting is done wisely, for 40 or even more days, not only without harm, but with very beneficial results. Why in a situation, a forced fast of a few days can lead to death, while a voluntary fast, for about 6 weeks, is beneficial? The answer is, of course, that it is the state of mind and the character of the thoughts that kills, and not the lack of food. Again, after a few days of starvation, a person is usually in a state of great weakness and prostration. However, whoever undergoes a voluntary fast, usually continues his work, and it is only in the later stages, that he works less than usual. A reverend gentleman recently undertook a fast of 40 or 50 days, a fact which was detailed in our diaries. The surprising thing is, that during this time, he not only continued with his usual duties, but also found the concentration and mental effort with which to write a book on a demanding subject. This contrasts sharply with the state of a starving man, who after only a few days, is reduced to a state of collapse and exhaustion, followed quickly by death. Here we can appreciate the immense influence exerted by mind and thought on endurance and survival. Our mental and emotional capacity has exceptional power over our existence, and demonstrates how the right approach can lead to amazing results even in the most extreme circumstances. In the case of the starving man, he thinks he is dying because he has no food, and consequently, he dies very soon. The fasting man thinks that by fasting he is improving his health, and his health improves accordingly, even to the point of overcoming the incurable, so-called, organic disease. Lately, there have been published in the newspapers many cases of important people who have voluntarily undergone a prolonged fast, and in doing so, have regained health. But this is not new at all. As far as I know, this method of healing was fairly well known in certain circles a quarter of a century or more ago, although its mental aspect does not seem to have been appreciated at its true value. There is no reason why a starving man, if he were well fed at first, could not live as long as a fasting man. And he would, if he could only control his thoughts, and think in the same way as a fasting man thinks. But in the first place, he would have to be convinced that fasting is beneficial to health, and this would not be easy, because ignorance and prejudice die hard. Moreover, as man is prone to look to the future with anxiety, he would probably be consumed with worry. For he would fear that he would not be able to obtain food after his compulsory fasting had passed the beneficial stage or limit. But the fact is that it is not the absence of food that kills a hungry man, but his state of mind. It is his thoughts of fear that kill him, just as it is the thoughts and expectation of healing that keep the fasting man alive, preserving his strength and capacity for work. It should not be inferred from these few remarks that I am in favor of promiscuous fasting, for an ill-considered fast can cause much harm. In some cases, fasting is beneficial, although it should be done under experienced supervision. There is also much ignorance on another point, which is the possibility of controlling thought. It is generally not known that our thoughts can be controlled and regulated, in the same way that a London policeman controls and regulates traffic. He raises his hand and, instantly, the traffic behind him stops, allowing vehicles on a cross street to pass. Undesirable and destructive thoughts can be stopped, while other thoughts, of a desirable and constructive nature, can be encouraged. People say, "You can't help having these thoughts, can you?" They take for granted that one cannot control one's thoughts. They do not realize that it is possible to deliberately change the subject, as far as one's thoughts are concerned, in the same way that one changes the subject of conversation. We all change the subject of conversation, if we find it unpleasant, but how many of us change the subject of our thoughts, in the same deliberate way, by exercising our will? However, it can be done, almost as easily, if only we do it, instead of thinking and saying that it cannot be done. Not only is it possible to change the subject of our thoughts, but it is also possible to refrain from thinking altogether. Both are achievements of the highest possible value, and can only be acquired through practice and training. But even the weakest of us can acquire them, if we are quietly persistent. We need not be intelligent, nor have great gifts, nor be out of the ordinary. And in fact, we may be far below average in mental gifts, willpower, and intellectual endowments. However, if we are quietly persistent, over time, we can learn to overcome our thoughts. And when we become masters of our thoughts, we become masters of ourselves, and when we become masters of ourselves, we become masters of life itself. Not by opposing the discipline of their experiences, but by dealing with them in the best possible way, keeping a calm and steady mind, a calm and an unwavering spirit. Chapter 3. Victims of Suggestion. We are all victims, to a greater or lesser extent, of suggestion. Strong-minded and unscrupulous persons deliberately influence others by means of suggestion, in order to take advantage of them. A lawyer in a court of law says to a witness, "I suggest to you." And then follows a suggestion, which may be both false and unfair, but which may so overwhelm or confuse a witness, as to destroy the value of his testimony. Thus it is that a strong mind overpowers a weaker one, by force of will and suggestion. The hypnotist suggests to his victim that a piece of cold metal applied to his naked back is a red-hot iron, and immediately the flesh burns and blisters. Much like what would happen if the metal were really red-hot. Or he may suggest to his victim that a glass of kerosene is a glass of lemonade, and he, the victim, will drink it, evidently enjoying it, and thinking it is lemonade. And thus, in this and many other ways, the hypnotist demonstrates how powerful suggestion is. In one of Dr. Schofield's books, possibly this very one, the story is told of two well-known physicians, which, as a demonstration of the influence of suggestion, beckoned a man into a restaurant, and then told him that he was seriously ill, and that he should rest in bed. The man, knowing their reputation and high standing as physicians, believed them, went home, went to bed, and died. It is fair and charitable to suppose that none of the doctors expected more than a slight illness as a result of what would seem a foolish and reprehensible action. Every day we are told in the newspaper to take so-and-so's pills. We may ignore the suggestion for years, but, sooner or later, we may find ourselves taking the pills, or advising someone else to do so. You see a man with watery eyes, sneezing and using his handkerchief. This vision suggests flu to you, with the result that, if you do not have a positive mindset, you may shortly develop an attack yourself. Suggestion affects us, in 1,001 different ways. We receive it through our eyes, ears, taste, smell, and touch. We are victims of it at all times, unless we learn to have a positive mentality, and to test ourselves against suggestion, in all its forms. There is no room for me, other than to mention other ways, by which we are unconsciously affected and influenced by suggestion. The advertising of medicines, patented in newspapers and magazines, are the most potent and powerful means of suggestion. We have already mentioned the effect of being told day after day, in our newspaper and by means of billboards, to take a certain brand of pills. But modern ideas of advertising, of useless and harmful drugs, leave these advertising methods far behind, in terms of suggestive force and value. Pictures of people sneezing, and of others bent over with backache, can only have one effect, and that is to make people imagine that they are suffering from the ailment described. I remember when I was a child, I read in the newspapers of the time long advertisements, which were headed, "What is this new disease that is coming upon us?" It affected me so much, that I became convinced that I was suffering from the disease, and moreover seriously. I became so alarmed that, no doubt, I would not have taken long to become really ill, if I had not told my parents of my fears. I shall never forget the shouts of joy with which they greeted my confession. It seemed as if they would never stop laughing. But they laughed at my fears, and since then I have maintained a positive attitude, towards or against, advertisements for patent medicines. Many of my readers, you will have read the humorous account, given by the late Jerome Klapka, of his experience with a medical symptom play. He said that when he finished reading the book he realized, that he had all the diseases in the world, except maid's knee. A book written, no doubt, to make laugh and amuse, but with a pinch of truth that, if the masses would realize, would make the drug dealers close the business. There is also what is called mass suggestion. We are all prone to think the same as the crowd, and feel the same emotions as the masses. It is very easy for a positive person to influence the thoughts and emotions of a crowd of people. It is difficult for one of the crowd not to be moved with the crowd. This is why people, who are ordinarily sensible, become crowd followers on occasions of national rejoicing. It is also the reason why people, who are peaceful and harmless in private life, may, when in a crowd, join in acts of violence and disorder. It is simply that the excitement of the mass takes hold of them, influencing them so strongly that they get carried away. It is a fact that some people are more influenced by suggestion than others. Some are rigid and phlegmatic, and on them, suggestion seems to have less effect. Others, on the contrary, are more sensitive and very nervous. These are very influenced by suggestion, being an easy prey, until they learn to be proof against it. They may feel that they have gone wrong, and that life has been unfair to them by making them so sensitive. But they need not feel sorry for themselves. For, on the contrary, they have much to be thankful for, because people of this type are the ones who can benefit most from suggestion, when a proper and scientific use is made of it. Finally, we come to the subject of temptation. We are all tempted in one way or another. What tempts one severely may not affect another at all, but each is tempted in a peculiar way. What is temptation, if not suggestion? We need not discuss whence, or from whom suggestion comes. Surely it is enough that we know that we are victims of it, until we learn to resist it successfully. There is no suggestion more subtle than that of temptation. It is so cunning that it seems impossible to counteract it in any way. Even in our best moments, when we would like to perform noble deeds, vile ideas and motives are suggested to us. If we do not want to fall, we must exercise eternal vigilance. And it is for this that we are told in the greatest of all books, by the greatest of all teachers. Watch and pray, that ye enter not into temptation. To conclude this chapter, let me touch lightly on the teaching of those who assert that almost everything is suggestion. Their theory is that we possess only consciousness, and that everything that forms our life is the result of suggestion. Thus they say, poverty is the result of the acceptance of suggestions of poverty. Sickness, the result of the acceptance of suggestions of sickness. Problems, the result of the acceptance of suggestions of problems, and so on. To counteract these suggestions, autosuggestions of the opposite type are recommended. The person affected by poverty is advised to whisper to himself, while sleeping, suggestions of wealth, prosperity and abundance. If the subconscious, or as some say, the unconscious, accepts the suggestion, then poverty ends. The sick person does the same thing, except that he uses suggestions of health, with a similar pleasurable result, if the subconscious or inner power mind just accepts the suggestion that is whispered to him. All this may seem like pure garbage to most of our readers. Although, however, the writer is unwilling to accept such teaching in the above crude form, although, as far as he believes, there is a considerable amount of truth in it. Nevertheless, it is not advisable to play with the subconscious mind in this way. Nowadays, many suffer the effects of unwise experiments, carried out without knowledge or experience. Chapter 4. The Secret of Self-Improvement. Mold and shape life, like clay in the hands of the potter. Why is right thinking so important? It is important because it influences our actions. It is important because it forges character and a firm mind. It is important because our well-being and the success of our whole life depend on it. It is important because through right thinking, we can overcome harmful suggestion. First of all, we have to realize that thought is the cause of our actions and decisions. This is largely because our circumstances depend on our thoughts. If, for example, we do not overcome the difficulties of life in our thoughts, we will never be able to overcome them in actual experience. By this I mean that our difficulties must be boldly faced and overcome in thought if we ever hope to really overcome them. In a way, it is good advice to tell people not to obsess over their sorrows, but to think of pleasant things. But it can lead to a habit of thought, almost as destructive, as obsessing about problems. This negative application, of what purports to be good advice, is responsible for the failure of those who say, "I have tried to think correctly, but it makes no difference." The reason why it makes no difference is that it is not right thinking at all, but a form of wrong thinking. Those people say, "I never allow myself wrong thoughts about my problems, I refuse to think about them." That's right, and this is where the whole problem lies. Instead of facing the problems of life with courage, and overcoming them with thought, one runs away from them. As soon as the mind meets with an unpleasant thought, with the thought of a nagging duty to be performed, or of a crisis to be faced, or of a difficulty to be overcome, the mind shuns it, and passes on to something more pleasant. He who says, "I never think of my troubles," and runs away from unpleasant thoughts of this kind, finds that he can never overcome real difficulties, when they arise in his life. And in fact, his so-called right thinking prevents him from making decisions, and dealing firmly and sensibly with his difficulties. We must first overcome in our thoughts, if we ever want to overcome in actual experience. The world can be divided into two classes of people: 1, those who overcome life, and 2, those who are overcome by life. Those who overcome the difficulties of life are those who do it with thought. Those who are overcome by the difficulties of life are those who do not overcome with thought. Even if the latter, they have not deliberately practiced, dodging unpleasant thoughts, in a misguided attempt to follow a line of thought, which they erroneously believe to be correct. They are still passive, that is to say, they fail to overcome, through thought, the difficulty which must eventually be overcome, in actual experience. The secret of overcoming lies in the victory of thought. If we continually overcome in our thoughts, we develop a firm mind. Without a firm mind, it is impossible to win in the battle of life. On the other hand, there is no difficulty, capable of human solution, that cannot be overcome by a firm mind. In truth, if a man's mind, if it is steadily directed towards a certain object, it will not only succeed, but the most remarkable things can be accomplished, in spite of anything that may be expected. The mind becomes powerful and grows in strength, when confronted with a difficulty in thought. It advances towards the difficulty in thought, and then gives it the impetus of its whole mind and will. And so, the man advances in his totality, through the difficulty to the other side, gaining victory. This generates an inner power, which is cumulative, which, when we come to our difficulty in actual experience, helps us to go through it successfully. This is very different from worrying about things. Worry is destructive. By worrying about our problems, we not only stimulate fear, one of the most destructive emotions, but we also make grooves in the brain. And around these grooves revolve our thoughts, in an endless repetition. Through the practice of worry, the brain is built in such a way that worry becomes a habit. That is, as soon as we think of some impending problem, or something goes wrong in our life or work, or we think that something has gone wrong or will go wrong, or we fear that it may go wrong, then, immediately the cells used by worry, are stimulated into action, being already fully charged with nervous energy, waiting to explode. And the thoughts whirl and whirl, along the groove prepared for them. Goodbye to peace of mind, goodbye to sleep and, in time, goodbye to health. Some people are of a worrying nature, something they inherit from their parents. The writer is one of these people. Others, on the other hand, never worry about anything. If they were condemned to death, they would probably sit down and read a book. If the executioner were standing next to them, they would probably say, "Please wait a minute or two, until I have finished this chapter." On one occasion, an acquaintance of mine had to be informed, that he was suffering from a disease, which would deprive him of one of his senses. Now, he was told, "You must try not to worry about it." He let out a quiet, carefree laugh, and then said, "I won't worry, we are not a worrying family. We take things as they come, and find they're not so terrible, after all." There are always compensations. This shows what an amazing difference there is in the nature and temperament of people. We believe, however, that the proportion of people who worry is much greater than those who do not. As the subject of worry is so important, we must devote a separate chapter to it. But although we should not worry about our problems or imaginary fears, we must face them with courage, in thought and will. In no case should we run away from them, for there is probably nothing more negative and destructive than this. Those who refuse to face their difficulties, and continue to avoid the issue, are usually the biggest worriers. Avoiding the issue with thought increases the problems, so there really is more to worry about. At the risk of seeming repetitive, I must again point out this truth, so vital and important, that we must overcome in thought. The teaching which asks us to forget our troubles and think of pleasant things, or to allow ourselves to daydream, may be followed positively, but as it is usually applied, it is quite negative. When applied negatively, it weakens the will, robs one of initiative, and destroys one's power to decide and act. Instead of avoiding the issue, when the thought of the impending problem or difficulty arises in consciousness, we should face it with courage, affirming our ability to overcome it and emerge victorious. If every time this thought arises, we face it with an affirmation of power, overcoming and victory, then, when the time comes to face the difficulty in real life, we will discover that we have a great strength to overcome it and emerge triumphant. We will find ourselves with a firm mind, and a reserve of power that will surprise us. Facing thoughts of failure, difficulty or fear in this way has an effect on the subconscious mind. It receives a definite direction, and realizes what is expected of it. As a faithful servant, it does not fail us. These affirmations can be of various kinds, and must necessarily vary according to the type of person who uses them. For one, no affirmation that is not biblical and devotional in character can be helpful. For another, an affirmation of a religious type would not be helpful, but a more psychological form might be satisfactory. Each must choose the form that is most appealing to him or her. One who begins with a psychological form of affirmation may eventually adopt a religious or devotional one. The form that appeals to one in the present moment is the right one in the present moment. When therefore, the religiously minded person encounters a thought of difficulty, trial or fear, he can meet it boldly, with the opposite thought or affirmation. I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me, and therefore, I will go through this difficulty with the power of Christ, which I can use now and always. At the same time he can imagine himself, going through his difficulty with a push, being carried by invisible powers. In time, he forms the mental habit of facing all difficulties and fears mentally, with a victorious push. Instead of running away from them with thought, one meets them, naturally and habitually, with a feeling of victorious thrust. One who does this becomes very strong, firm, persevering, persistent, and big in character. Another type may not be able to use the religious form of affirmation, but may use something similar, though in a different form. He may confront the thought of trouble or fear by simply repeating the words, success, victory, overcoming. At the same time, imagining himself triumphantly going through his problem or difficulty, sustained and strengthened by powers he does not understand, but which spring from within him. By cultivating this mental habit, life changes enormously, simply because the character is improved outside of all knowledge. Instead of being overwhelmed by the difficulties of life, the student overcomes them. When he has achieved this victory, he finds new fields to conquer, new and beautiful vistas, which open before him. He discovers that he can mold and shape his character, and by this means, mold and shape his life. Some people think in the form of mental images. The nature of their life and the character of their circumstances depend on the character of their mental images. Therefore, if they are of problems, failures, etc., they should be invested in their opposite. they should be reversed into their positive opposite. Some people are naturally given to negative mental images. When they think of the quarter, they imagine themselves unable to pay the rent, and the terrible consequences, such as forced sale, foreclosure, and so on. When they think of business, if they are landlords, they see a picture of bankruptcy, and of themselves in court, being questioned by the receiver. If they belong to the employed classes, they picture themselves out of work, homeless, one of the thousands seeking employment in vain, and suffering all the ills and discomforts which such a situation entails. If they see an accident, they picture themselves as victims, mangled on the roadside. If they see or read about a hospital, they see themselves as inmates, undergoing a dreaded operation, or saying goodbye to their weeping relatives, as they pass on to a less terrible world. Unfortunately, allowing such mental images to occupy the mind can bring about the very conditions they fear and visualize. For this reason, it is of the utmost importance that all such negative mental images be reversed into their positive opposites. In this way, not only are the harmful effects of such negative images avoided, but the opposite states are made possible in one's own experience. If instead of these mental images of failure, poverty, disaster, accident, illness and death, they are transmuted into images of success, prosperity, health, protection against danger and a happy old age, then, these desirable states tend to manifest in life, instead of the undesirable ones, which might otherwise have appeared. For example, if instead of seeing a mental image of despair, or of being sold, as a result of not being able to pay the rent, one persists in a mental image of rent paid, a comfortable house, without care, then, this happy state of affairs is likely to manifest itself, much more than would otherwise be the case. As the mental image is probably the most powerful form of thought, the importance of its correct cultivation cannot be underestimated. The effect of such cultivation is to produce a state of positive mentality, a very desirable condition. It also forges character, making us strong where before we were weak, and capable of accomplishing many things, which before we were incapable of undertaking. Chapter 5. Creators of our own evil. Do we live in an evil universe, and are we victims of a malicious and cruel destiny? Or do we live in an ordered universe whose underlying principle is goodness or love? We cannot help but think that most of us inwardly believe that the former is true, and not the latter. That is why we harbor subconscious fears, that is why we are pessimistic, even though outwardly it may seem otherwise. Who can measure the terrible effects caused by this inner pessimism? As I have said elsewhere, belief in evil tends to produce evil. Belief in failure tends to produce failure, belief in disease tends to produce disease, and so on. What is needed is a change of belief, after which, a change of thought automatically follows. The fact is that we live in an ordered universe, although we ourselves are not. We are not in correspondence with our true environment. Our true environment is an ordered and perfect universe. The hidden law of life is love or cooperation. Reinheimer, the biologist, teaches that in all nature, both in plants and animals, health and progress follow when this law of cooperation is obeyed, and that disease and disorder follow its violation. That is, when predatory or parasitic practices are followed, instead of those of service and cooperation. First we have to believe that we live in an ordered universe, and that life is based on love. We also have to believe and recognize that the cause of our own evil, or disorder in our lives, is to be found in ourselves. The truth of the whole matter is that we are not in harmony with life, and we are not living in obedience to its fundamental law. Harmony, peace, true success and a carefree life are only possible to the extent that we are in correspondence with life, with the ordered universe in which we live. To the extent that we work in accordance with the law of life and the universe which is love, or cooperative help. There will come a time, as the prophet Isaiah tells us, when this law will be unequivocally observed. When the lion will eat the same food as the ox, and when they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. For the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. This ideal state may be far away, but we, who know the truth, can put it into practice here and now. In doing so, we cannot fail to bring into our lives an indescribable harmony and peace. We can thank heaven every day for living in an ordered universe. We can pray every day to be in correspondence with it. We can think and act every day in accordance with its underlying principle or law of cooperation and useful service. Our first thought, in every circumstance of life will be, is not what I can get out of it, but how much I can help. This, of course, is foolishness by worldly standards, but it is really the highest wisdom, and leads to the attainment of a life of true harmony, contentment and peace. Once upon a time there was a wise man, who lived in a small town, and to whom many came, seeking advice and information. One day, a newcomer to the city went to the wise man, and said to him, "What kind of people are those who live here?" The sage responded by asking, "What kind of people were in the city from which you come?" The newcomer replied, "Oh, they were miserable, unfriendly, mean, rude and very difficult to deal with." "Well," said the wise man, "here you will find them just the same." Another newcomer approached the sage, and asked him the same question, "What kind of people are those who live here?" The old man answered again by asking, "What were the people like in the village where you come from?" "Oh," answered the second newcomer, "it was a splendid village, kind, friendly and full of kindness. I was sorry to leave them behind." "Then," said the wise man, "here you will find them just the same." Rather an exaggeration, you may be thinking, but it holds a great truth. Our individual world, for each of us lives in a little world of our own, is a reflection of our mental life. We populate it with hatred and discord, or with love and harmony, according to our thoughts. Our life is full of evil, insofar as we do not harmonize with the divine order, which is the only reality. Life is essentially good, although it may contain many disappointments, and many blows. Many of them, however, are of our own creation. Do we not reap, in maturity and old age, the fruits of the mistakes or sins of our youth? Life is good, though it is character building. If we harmonize with it, willingly enduring its disciplines, we avoid many misfortunes and problems. In other words, we stop creating our own evil. Chapter 6. Correct thought and attitude, the basis of success and prosperity. Those who succeed possess a certain type of mind. It is certain that they have ambition, vision and motive force, capacity for work and a strong will. They never stint in their efforts and, moreover, take advantage of every opportunity that comes their way. But their main cause of success is their way of thinking. They think in terms of success and achievement, abundance and prosperity. Life tends, over time, to express the type of thinking in which you habitually think. If we constantly think in terms of success and prosperity, then, sooner or later, we express these things, to a greater or lesser degree in our life. That is, according to our ability, we achieve the greatest possible success in our case. Not all of us can be at the top of the tree, but each one can ascend to the best position, for which our particular genius fits us. Except in the case of those peculiar people, who believe they can do anything and everything, while they can do nothing properly, we can all achieve far more, than we could ever believe possible. There are hidden abilities in us, which are unimaginable. Our capabilities seem to increase, as our responsibilities increase. Life demands greater achievements from us, and lo and behold, power and ability appear, in a surprising way to ourselves, and probably even more so to our friends. I have conversed, by the way, with a great number of unsuccessful people. By unsuccessful people, I mean those who, though hardworking and eager to get ahead, always sink to the bottom, no matter how much they are helped, and in spite of the splendid opportunities offered to them. In all of them, I have found the same kind of mental habit. They think in terms of hardship and failure. Because of this, all their actions and decisions, unknown to themselves, are of such a kind that they bring about conditions of hardship and failure. Men with the same capabilities do not have the same success. One may appear fortunate, while the other may appear very unfortunate, but I am convinced that the cause of the difference lies in the mind. One has a fixed idea of success and achievement, which acts as a center around which his thoughts revolve, both conscious and subconscious. While the other has a fixed idea or fear of failure, around which his thoughts continually revolve. One is full of energy and inspired to achieve success, while the efforts of the other are undermined, and his energies sapped, by a hidden idea, or fear of failure and ruin. Now, while it is true that one may be born with a successful type of mind, while another may inherit a failing type of mind, it does not necessarily follow that the latter must always remain a failure. Your mind type can change. To achieve this, you do not have to resort to the services of an expensive mental specialist or practitioner, you do it yourself, by changing your thinking. By changing his thinking, he gradually transforms the fixed idea of failure into one of success. The attitude of the mind changes, and the thoughts are trained to flow in a new direction. This, in time, changes the whole man, so that he rises like a cork in the water, instead of sinking like a stone. He reaches what for him is the pinnacle of his profession, or vocation, instead of gravitating to the bottom. He discovers that there is plenty of room at the top, simply because so few use his mind constructively. He becomes one of the favored few, just because he uses his mind as a creative instrument, and not for the mere purpose of performing routine work. We must not forget that true success is based on service. Only through our cooperative help to the world, we can find happiness, and this is in itself, true success. Money and fame are useless, if they do not bring happiness and satisfaction. Service and cooperative help bring the truest and most lasting success. Combined with efficiency, they make us indispensable in our particular branch, or vocation. Sooner or later, quality of character tells its own story. Those who rise quickly, laughing at such things as service, integrity, etc., generally fall later to ruin and disgrace. Therefore, our thoughts should not be merely of success and achievement, but of service and help. We should not think so much of, what will I get out of it, as of, how useful I can be, for all solid success is based on the degree of our usefulness to the community. The more useful we are, the more indispensable we become, and therefore, the greater the reward, as a rule. Apart from all this, the fact is that thinking in terms of success and achievement, while maintaining a consciousness of abundance and prosperity, tends to attract these things to us. The mind is creative to an unimaginable degree, for most people. And our thoughts attract to us, things of the same kind, opportunities for success and more abundant circumstances, on the one hand, or failure and lack, on the other. The inner cause of success is therefore in the mind. Instead of letting it wander where it pleases, we have to train it to think constructively. While others spend their leisure time foolishly, we must, on the contrary, force the mind to think positively, in terms of achievement. We can keep an ideal in the mind, in a continuous way, around which thoughts will naturally and easily revolve. Such a constructive thought forces us to work and strive, while other people waste time in pleasure. However, it is not a difficulty, but a great joy. It awakens our enthusiasm, after which all tasks become comparatively easy. Sooner or later, just when we are ready for it, the opportunity presents itself to us, something as sure as the rising and setting of the sun. The law is infallible. When we are ready, opportunity appears. To end this chapter, let me issue a warning. Success can become our master, and we can become its slave. Therefore, it is important that we choose the highest form of success, if we can. However, as a rule, we have no choice, because our ambition, so to speak, is born in us. We have in mind the case of a poor boy, with an elementary education in the countryside, who is now an ordained missionary, seemingly an impossible feat for someone of his position. It is impossible to say whether he chose his vocation, or whether his vocation chose him. But in either case, his life of work, sacrifice and service, even if it means fatigue, fever, poverty and mockery by the world, will bring him the truest satisfaction. He is most successful, who finds his success in service and in trying to make the world a better place for others to live in. Then it does not matter if his success becomes his master and he his slave, because such slavery becomes the greatest joy and gives the greatest satisfaction. These are the treasures which no money can buy, and which always elude those who seek them through the acquisition of wealth and fame. Chapter 7. The effect of thought on health. Thought affects our health much more than is generally believed. While it is true that hereditary diseases, devitalized food and unhealthy lifestyles play a prominent role, I believe that thought is the most important factor. When I say thought, I include emotions, because they are aroused by our thoughts. And yet, it is possible to avoid arousing emotional energy by training thoughts to think along different lines from those suggested by primitive desires or impulses. Generally, in works of this kind, the reader is told to stop thinking about illness, discomfort, etc. and to think instead of health, vigor, wholeness, etc. This is good advice, insofar as it applies to health. This is good advice insofar as it applies, because thinking about sickness and ill health creates a morbid condition that leads to sickness. It is well to think of oneself as whole, healthy and full of life, joy and energy. Such a mental image can only do good. Therefore, the beginner can say, I have radiant health, and try to feel so, and imagine himself, mentally, as the image of perfect health and vitality. In this way, he takes the first step towards better health. This method, though good in its way, is by no means the ideal method, and therefore, better methods should be adopted as soon as possible. But there is much more to this subject than this. The causes of ill health are much deeper. In this little work, we cannot enter into a deep study of the underlying cause of all diseases and disorders, but we may mention 2 or 3, which are fundamental and of the greatest importance. First, we must understand that health is a state of normality. That is to say, it is not bad to be well, and abnormal to be bad. There are 3 emotional states that rob us of our health. And these are 1. Sensuality, 2. Resentment, and 3. Anxiety. They can be overcome or neutralized by cultivating the habit of having thoughts of 1. Purity, 2. Goodwill, including forgiveness and understanding of the other's point of view, and 3. Rest. 1. Despite the fact that in medical works, it is usually attributed most of the diseases to syphilis and syphilitic diseases. Our opinion is that one of the fundamental causes of ill health, and even of the disease itself, lies in the impurity of thought, and indulgence in sensual thoughts, kind, and the like. The evils of sensual conduct are bad enough, but we believe that the harmful effects of indulging in sensual or amorous thoughts are equally serious and far-reaching. The evil, from a health point of view, as distinct from the purely moral, is that such thoughts arouse desire, and this, in turn, generates emotional energy. This energy has to be repressed, and this is probably the cause of many bodily disorders. Now, to repress or to qualify all natural desires as something perverse and impure, is not the best way to face the difficulty. The only perfect way is to think above or beyond these things. We must reason with ourselves, pointing out that there is really nothing in sensuality, that it is the greatest possible fraud. And that as far as the higher love of the sexes is concerned, if it cannot be a fraud, then beyond it there are more important things. Every young man knows that it is much better to get up early, either to do some work, or to go to bathe, than to lie in bed thinking about sensual things. Would it not also be better for an old maid to get up early and devote herself to gardening, or to any hobby that interests her, rather than to lie in bed, thinking of a pure love that can never be hers? The same applies to our thoughts. The limits of our mind must be extended. We must think above and beyond, from the things of sense and emotion, no matter how good, in their highest form, they may be, to the larger and more spacious things that are possible. Is it not better to think of snow-capped mountains, of feats of heroism, of lives of self-sacrifice, of the great universe, of eternal truths, of God's great plan for man? In our journey of discovery, through time and space, rather than in things that arouse sexual emotion, mere amorous feelings or desperate longing? Well, yes, and 1,000 times, not only from the moral, intellectual and spiritual point of view, but also from the point of view of health. Instead of repressing thoughts of sexual origin, we must think above them, and beyond them. In doing so, we transmute vital forces into higher intellectual and spiritual powers. Instead of repressing or wasting life force, and our emotional nervous energy, we use it in higher service. Thus we become not only healthier and stronger, but nobler and greater, both in mind and character. We also become capable of greater endurance, and of much higher attainments. 2. Thoughts of goodwill and forgiveness are curative and preventive of ill health. Hatred, vexation, grudges, prejudice, thoughts of poison and revenge are destructive of health, as are anger, passion, and similar feelings. In place of these, it is possible to cultivate thoughts of goodwill, forgiveness, mercy, non-resistance to wrong done to us. All of these generate healthy currents. They also help to ward off illness and ill health, simply because they bring us into harmony with the underlying motive of life. Undoubtedly, most of us are well past the stage of hatred. It is true that we do not want to hate or hurt anyone, but have we given up all our petty grudges and resentments? Probably not. We may have forgotten them, but they are still buried, smoldering in the caverns of the mind, causing disharmony, which translates into disease, or outward disorder. 3. We do not believe that any physician would disagree with us when we state that care, tension, worry, grief, anxiety and similar mental states are the underlying cause, or at least the contributing cause, of many serious ailments. Many serious ailments appear after a period of tension, anxiety, and suspense. Even diseases, due mainly to alcoholic and other excesses, are precipitated by worry or mental shock. In spite of the excesses of the patients, no disease can attack them until they meet with a loss, disappointment, or some anxiety or worry. Then they fall off immediately. But those who do not commit excesses are also affected, in spite of their sobriety in moderation. The worry and grief, the suspense and anxiety caused by a wayward child, the grief and emotional upset, which are experienced by a betrayed and abandoned wife. Or the long and continuous financial worries of a businessman in difficulties, all these wear out the nervous system, sap the strength, and open the system to disease. It is not pretended that what we call thought science, or right thinking, enables us to avoid all the troubles of life, although many of them are of our own making. And in any case, we still have to reap to some extent the fruit of wrong sowings of the past, but it does allow us to face them in such a way that we prevent them from harming us. And this is a great advantage. Two people can meet with the same type and amount of problems. One takes it badly, and as a result, becomes very sick, as well as unhappy, sour and moody. Meanwhile, the other comes out of the problem unscathed, and actually improves and refines his character. The most important part of our work is to teach people how to cope with life, to emerge triumphant from all their experiences. Most physicians appreciate this part of our work because they know that if a patient relaxes and maintains a positive attitude in difficult times, he he or she will recover quickly and avoid illness. Consequently, right thinking acts as a disease preventative in multiple aspects, and also as a healer, by bringing our minds to a state of rest and peace. Fundamentally, the cause of all disorder lies in separation from the divine order. If we could all become perfect, and be completely aligned with the divine, then we would not experience suffering and problems. The cause of our suffering is that we are not in harmony or correspondence with the perfect inner divine order. God does not punish us, we punish ourselves, or rather, our evil punishes us. Evil is its own punishment. Being separated from the divine order explains everything. The prodigal son was not punished by his father, he punished himself, separating himself from the parental home, and wandering in a distant country. When he returned he was forgiven, and all was harmony and joy. Put in modern language, we have to return from our life of separation, in thought, desire, emotions and affections, to the center of all life, order and harmony, and unite ourselves to it. This means that, in the first place, we must possess the desire to do so, and secondly, that we must bring all our thoughts in consonance with the divine innermost. Of course, such a thing would be impossible, were it not for the fact that he who aspires, receives help from heaven itself. All the powers of darkness rise up to prevent it, if they can, but there is one who has trodden this path before us, who was tempted in the same way, and who, nevertheless, won a great victory. Not I, but Christ, said St. Paul, and this is the secret of success in thought control. Chapter 8. The Power of Attraction of Thought. There are two old proverbs, which are well known and often quoted, but whose profound psychological significance is perhaps not fully appreciated. One is, birds of a feather flock together, and the other is, you can tell a man's character by the company he keeps. The source of this attraction is, to a large extent, in the thought of a man. We place thoughts of a certain type, we attract people with a similar type of thinking. We are attracted by the invisible forces of attraction. It is true, that the character of our thoughts becomes, over time, written on our face. So that everyone can see, whether we are pure or dirty, strong or weak, loving or hard, noble or vile. But it is largely the attractive power of thought that attracts people to us. Our thoughts not only attract like-minded people, but also other similar thoughts, as well as opportunities and circumstances. The human mind, although it can be called creative in a sense, acts more as a receiver, than as a generator of thoughts. We have, so to speak, two doors in our mind, one which opens to a stream of heavenly thoughts, good, beautiful, ennobling, wholesome and healthy. And the other, which opens to a stream of undesirable, debilitating and destructive thoughts. It is impossible to have both doors open at the same time. When we have thoughts of purity, integrity, charity, etc. That is, thoughts of heavenly character, opens the door of heaven and all that is beautiful, allowing the entry, a torrent of similar thoughts. That is why prayer is so valuable. Prayer is the elevation of thought and attention, also of the heart and affections, towards heaven. In response, there is a return flow or influx of divine life, thought and ideas. He who perseveres in this practice becomes, over time, a person so transformed by this divine influx that he acquires a heavenly mentality. Then, the other door, which leads to all that is undesirable, always remains closed. During the transitional stage, that door that leads to evil thoughts, can partially open, and give rise to what we know as temptations. If we try to close the door, and fight against the forces, thoughts or suggestions of evil, we find that it opens even more. The only way to deal with the situation effectively, is to raise the thoughts, attention, mind and heart, towards the good and heavenly reality. When our attention is fixed in this way on reality or heaven, God or Christ, then the other door closes again. The only reason for it to open suddenly, is that our attention on the good and pure, weakens at times. The influx of the divine, however, continually strengthens and changes us, so that it becomes more and more possible to keep our thoughts on a heavenly plane. And this, in turn, keeps the other door more effectively closed. The negative aspect of all this is that if we allow the door of weak or bad thinking to open, the door of divine good closes. Heaven, despite all its good intentions and desires, cannot help us if we allow our thoughts and attention to be occupied by lower things. This is how we see the value of faith here. If we raise our hearts and our thoughts above our problems, then we open the door to heaven. So an influx of new life, power and goodness flows into us, enabling us to overcome. However, as soon as we look down, ruminating on our problems, the door to heaven closes, while the other door opens, allowing a stream of destructive thoughts to enter and weaken us. In this way, by refusing to dwell on our problems and difficulties, and looking with faith to heaven, and thinking of divine perfection or reality, we are liberated in a twofold way. First, the spiritual source of problems is closed, and second, we open ourselves to receive a constant stream of heavenly influences. Not only do we attract to us one of the two streams of thought and influence just described, but we also create for ourselves an atmosphere, either attractive or repelling. This atmosphere, aura or personal magnetism, attracts people and opportunities, or drives them away. If two men, one with an attractive atmosphere and one with a repellent atmosphere, were each placed in a small business, and given equal opportunities, the former would do much more business than the latter, simply because he would attract customers, charm them, receive their recommendations, and retain their patronage. He would make a living, where the man with a repellent environment would starve. The same would be true in any profession. A doctor, a lawyer, a clergyman, would attract a large following, if he possessed an attractive atmosphere. But he would have only a small following if he had a repellent atmosphere. To create or develop an attractive atmosphere, we must feel goodwill towards those we meet. We must be eager to serve and help, and we must have the right thoughts. Flattery is not required, and in fact, should be avoided at all times. The important thing to remember is that, regardless of our vocation or position, we are like a magnet, which draws others to us, through goodwill and inner kindness. And not out of obligation, or against their will. We should also keep in mind, that we attract others to us, not to serve our own selfish ends, but to bless them, help them and make them happy. Once upon a time, there was an undertaker, who was so likable, that he did more funerals than any of his competitors. His sympathy attracted people because it was real. If it had been faked, it would never have rung true, and he would have been shunned as a charlatan and hypocrite. He had no desire to do business with his sympathy, he would have hated the idea, but he simply could not help being sympathetic, because he had a great heart of love, open to all who were in trouble. Therefore, we must attract people, simply to bless. If it makes us prosperous, we cannot help it, our aim should be to bless and serve. Now some readers will say, that the teaching of this chapter is quite impossible. They will say, and rightly, that soon after, a man begins to think rightly, and to aspire to better things, he is subjected to an invasion of, apparently, all the powers of evil. And that it seems as if the floodgates of hell were unleashed upon him, thus making further progress impossible. This is true, but there is another part of the story, and that is that he who aspires, receives help from above. Whenever we look up, lifting our thoughts to a higher plane, life and health, strength and blessing, flow to us. No matter how much we are tempted, we receive greater strength from our elder brother, than the power of evil that assails us. This great one has been before us, overcoming and conquering, and he it is who can help us and does help us, in our efforts to rise to higher and better things. For greater is he that is in you, than he that is in the world. Chapter 9. Thought Control and Spiritual Attainment. In this little book I have dwelt too much, perhaps, on material attainment. But the main reason for doing so has been that it is our duty to serve our day and our generation, and to be as great and useful in service as it is possible for us to be. I do not advocate selfish success. Our ambition should be, not how much I can get, but how much I can give, in service and doing things for the world. Therefore, the success and achievement that I advocate need not be about earning money or position. For it can mean giving one's life in missionary service, or other forms of self-denial and devotion to others. But no matter what our vocation in life is, power and thought control are of great importance. A young man can become a missionary, in spite of opposition and discouragement, simply because his mind is steady, and his thoughts are directed toward the goal of his ambition. Seemingly insurmountable difficulties are overcome simply because his thoughts are directed and concentrated on a particular object. If your mind were left to flounder, and your thoughts wander, you would never achieve your ambition. It should be noted that if we pursue success wholeheartedly, it eventually becomes our master. At first, success, it seems to us a very shy bird and difficult to catch. It drives us more and more, demanding constant self-denial and sacrifice. Until finally, we find ourselves committed to a life full of responsibilities and relative importance, from which we cannot withdraw or desert without losing our dignity. Then we discover that success, instead of being our servant, has become our master, while we have become its slave. It is important then, that we limit our material ambitions. However, there is no reason why we should limit our spiritual ambitions. Because we are successful in our search for God, only joy awaits us when we discover that success has become our slave and we have become its master. It is not generally recognized that it is not possible to achieve a great degree of spiritual attainment without thought control, the result of thought training. Brother Lawrence is an outstanding example of this. He is the great exponent of the practice of the presence of God. This humble servant of God, who worked daily among pots and pans, in the kitchen and at the sink of a monastery. He discovered that by training his thoughts to always flow toward his Lord, he became aware of his presence at all times. Brother Lawrence made a revealing observation. He felt more aware of the divine presence while scrubbing greasy pots and pans than when he was in his cell, engaged in devotional exercises. His understanding became clearer at that moment. This humble and ignorant brother became a saint, although he was not called so, and a teacher of many, simply by directing his thoughts to God and persevering, despite his tendency to wander. We can truly pray if we have some control over our thoughts. We direct our attention to God, and this forms a ladder by which our thoughts and affections ascend to God. Thought control is, in reality, fixing the attention on a certain object and keeping it there. As long as our attention is fixed on God, our thoughts will ascend the ladder thus constructed. Those whose faculties of attention and thought control are so weak as to be almost entirely lacking, should repeat the prayers. This is not as good as praying oneself, but it is a beginning and a step in the right direction. Whoever says or repeats his prayers, night and morning, possesses a connecting link between himself and heaven, which is lacking in others, who never make such an attempt. But to really pray, directing one's attention and thoughts towards God, is a very different thing. It is something much greater. It is a spiritual exercise of the highest order. However, it is not an easy thing to do, because until our thoughts are disciplined, they wander. The concerns of life, or its ambitions, attract our thoughts, so that soon we find ourselves thinking of material things, instead of spiritual things. Of course, our thoughts must be brought back again and again, until a habit is established, which makes true prayer possible. There are many degrees of true prayer. There is the prayer of supplication, there is the prayer of praise and thanksgiving, there is the prayer of meditation, there is contemplation. The last two are very advanced. They are only possible when an almost perfect degree of thought control has been developed. However, mastery of thought is not only necessary during times of prayer, for the attainment and development of spiritual faculties and powers. We need it equally during the day, when we deal with the dross and mire of things. We too can share in the experience of Brother Lawrence, who found that his work, which he disliked in the ordinary way, became pleasant, thanks to the divine presence. Tasks that were previously difficult and beyond his strength, he was able to accomplish once he learned to let the Lord help him with his presence. By frequently turning our thoughts and aspirations to the divine innermost, we become greatly helped and strengthened. And with time, even our work, which we may dislike in itself, is transformed and becomes pleasant, through a realization of the fact that it is a service of love to our fellow men. We become aware of a new companionship. We are not alone, because there is someone with us, who helps us to make life nobler, to become more faithful workers and servants, to do things for a higher motive. The result of all this is that a new and finer character is built, and this is eternal, because character can never die. And furthermore, we become entirely new creatures. We may not be religious or self-righteous, as is generally understood. But we may become nobler, truer, finer, types of men and women, for whom the world will have reason to be grateful. The inner or spiritual life is a very real thing. Two people may awaken spiritually and, through it, desire to live a nobler and higher life. One may succeed, while the other, after a hard struggle, may return to his old life. The reason is that the former keeps alive the flame of his inner life, while the latter lets it go out. The first perseveres with true prayer, and directing his thoughts to God, continually lifting them up to higher and better things. While the second neglects his prayer, does not persevere in controlling his thoughts, so that his spiritual life withers away, and becomes dead for lack of nourishment. Then, temptation comes like a flood, and the battle is too much, for the one who is not fortified by prayer. He gives up and returns to the same hopeless life, simply because it does not seem possible to do otherwise. The fault is not that the temptation is too strong, but that man isolates himself from the one source of infinite power, by his neglect of prayer, and his lack of perseverance in the control of thoughts. The importance of training the thoughts to turn away from unworthy things, to things that are noble, true, beautiful, and really worthwhile, is very great. Is it any wonder that he writes books, and publishes a magazine on the subject? Chapter 10. Overcoming Fear. Fear is probably the cause of more misfortunes in life than we imagine. Those who absolutely lack fear seem to be protected in a special way. It is well known that a dog does not attack those who have no fear. My limited experience in sports tells me that if one has no fear, the more reckless he is, the more likely it is that he will come out unscathed. I believe that the lions in the den into which Daniel was thrown could not hurt him, simply because he had no fear. It was only necessary that the Lord completely removed his fear, so that Daniel was perfectly safe. Proof of this is the experience of the missionaries. When they have faced mobs of armed cannibals, thirsty for their blood, fear has been completely removed. Advancing unarmed into what seemed certain death was as easy as encountering a flock of lambs, or attending a prayer meeting. In no case were the missionaries harmed. But the total absence of fear is not only a protection against mishaps in dangerous sports, nor against ferocious animals and murderous men. It is also a protection against infection and contagion. Napoleon visited the sick with pest, to show others that the disease could not affect, who did not fear it. I once knew a man who used to visit smallpox and plague hospitals, but never contracted either disease. And all, despite the fact that he used to kneel and pray, next to the beds of patients, inhaling microbes by the millions. His only safeguard was his thinking. He refused to admit that microbes could harm him. In other words, he trusted in God, and therefore, he had no fear. He demonstrated the absolute truth of Psalm 91. Thus we see that, in a sense, it is not the microbes, which make us prey to epidemic diseases, but a thought of fear, is the decisive factor. Two people are exposed to the same infection. One gets the disease, the other is not affected. Why? It can be said that the one who escapes is more robust and resistant, but this is not always the case, as often the strong are captured, and the weak are abandoned. It may be said, moreover, that the one that escapes possesses a greater power of endurance. So it is, but is not this largely due to the mind? He who has a more positive mind, it is he who is immune. Granted then, the necessity and desirability of the absence of fear, how do we overcome our hereditary defect? Most of us, we harbor some kind of fear, because even if we are not afraid of anything, we may have other fears, lurking in the hidden caverns of our mind. We may be physically courageous and yet fear for our business, our profession, or our job. The bleak specter of unemployment, bankruptcy, failure, may haunt us day and night. On the other hand, we may not fear these things, but we fear disease, infection, contagion, drafts, etc. So that each new epidemic fills us with apprehension and fear. How do you overcome these fears? Just in the same way you calm the fears of a small child who wakes up at night and is afraid of the dark. First you would tell him, there is nothing to be afraid of. Next, you could reason with him, showing him that the room is the same, when it is dark as when it is lighted, and that the things he fears, are merely in his own mind. If this is not enough, then say to him, I will stay with you, and hold your hand so that you will know that all is well, and that there is nothing to fear. Feeling your presence beside him, and being completely sure of your power and willingness to protect him, he soon falls peacefully asleep. Now we have to treat ourselves in the same way. We are very complex creatures and we can talk, discuss and reason, with ourselves. We proceed in exactly the same way, as we do with our small child. First of all, we say to ourselves, there is nothing in the whole universe that can make me afraid. This is not a mere empty boast, it is an affirmation of the truth. We do not mean by this that we ourselves are so strong that we can face and overcome all the powers of evil. What it means is that we, having sided with the angels have sided with us, in response, so to speak. It means that we have aligned ourselves, with the inner harmony of the universe, the divine order which nothing can destroy, and over which the forces of disorder, have no power whatsoever. It means that behind us, there is all the power of the hidden divine forces, which push us towards the glorious consummation, designed and planned for us, in the depths of the divine mind, and the heart of infinite love. Therefore, we can use the words of Edward Carpenter, all divine forces, hasten to supply my eternal joy. By doing this we can feel and realize, that it is just as we claim. That there are indeed divine forces behind us, pushing us towards a fuller and richer life, and lifting us to higher and better things. If you find these affirmations or invocations too advanced, lofty, or fantastic for you, you can easily choose words of your own that are effective in your case. But follow the same process. It is better to use the negative first, and then the positive. But, like our imaginary little son, who was afraid of the dark, we may feel the need for something else. He wanted us to stay with him, and hold his hand, so that he could feel and realize, that we were with him to protect and guard him. In the same way, we can invoke and realize, the presence of the omnipotent and eternal. There is one, who has overcome the world and defeated all the powers of evil, who has glorified his humanity, and has opened the way for us by his own self-sacrifice. He said to us, I will not leave you, just as he said, Behold, I am with you always, even to the end. Chapter 11. Not demand, but obedience. The beginner might naturally think that, having discovered the immense power of thought, all he has to do is to make use of it, according to his sweet will. But there is probably no greater mistake than this. It is because thought is so powerful, and its effects so far-reaching, that it is important that we train our thoughts to correspond to the inner laws of the universe. Each of us is part of a complete whole. God is our Father or center, and every man our brother. We are each other's servants. Until we realize this, we will not be in harmony with life and the universe, not only in our actions, but also in our thoughts. Because we have an erroneous idea of life, then all our thoughts will naturally be erroneous as well. It has been said that we can only conquer nature by obeying her laws. It is equally true that we can conquer life only by obeying the laws of life. If our thoughts are not in harmony with the purpose of life, we become plaque stains on the cosmic body. Only when we become brothers of humanity, living in tune with the laws of life and the grand scheme of the universe, can we experience harmony in ourselves. Only then can our life achieve true fulfillment in the highest sense of the word. It is possible to demand from life, and get what one demands. This leads to success, obtained, of course, at the cost of hard work and sacrifice. We all have to pay for our achievements. Those who are not willing to pay, cannot achieve anything. It is precisely because achievements demand so much of us, in terms of character, patience, perseverance, constancy, sacrifice, that makes them valuable, as character builders. Maintaining success and remaining undisturbed by it, demands greater qualities of character, than its attainment. But all those achievements, can bring neither happiness nor harmony, if they are demanded from life selfishly, without thought of others, without thought of God. There can be neither happiness, peace, nor harmony, if one demands to life selfishly. It is true that there is a moment in our life, when it seems that everything is in our hands, and that we are masters of our destiny, captains of our soul. This can incite us to achieve and conquer, and to encounter experiences, which are a necessary preparation for greater things. All this is good, as far as it is good, and can be a very necessary phase in our life. But sooner or later we realize that, although in a sense we are masters of destiny, in the sense that we can choose, between good and evil. However, all the time, there is a divinity that shapes our end, however rough it may be. There is an inner harmony, to which we must correspond. We belong to a complete whole, in which we occupy a place and of which we are a part. We can only enter into correspondence, with the harmony of that whole, becoming less selfish and more universal. In other words, we must love God, and love our neighbor. Instead of imposing our will on life, instead of becoming a center around which everything else must revolve. Instead of demanding and forcing, if we want to find true happiness and true satisfaction, we must love and serve God and man, life and the world, and thus enter into the harmony of the whole. The inner law of life is love, but it is better that we see it as cooperation. To the extent that we think, act and feel, in correspondence with this law, we find true happiness, peace, contentment, and things that are more precious than rubies. Things that no wealth can buy. We see then, why we must train ourselves, to have thoughts of goodwill, instead of those of hatred and resentment. Of cooperation, instead of selfish acquisition, of service, instead of personal gain. Only in this way can we become brothers of humanity. Only by becoming brothers of humanity, can we enter into correspondence, or a state of oneness, with the inner harmony that is divine. We live in an ordered universe, because behind the disorder of the surface of life, there is an inner divine order. This divine order would find its outward expression, if every man were in harmony with it. But the I stands in the way. Love, goodwill, and cooperation are the key by which each individual can access this inner harmony and order. By finding our own entrance to this harmony, we make it easier for our brothers and sisters to find their way as well. Psychology is taught today, especially in American books, which is hurtful and malicious. It teaches the misuse of the power of the mind, by means of suggestion. The mind and will are used to compel others, to act as the operator desires. For example, a salesman wants to get an order from a buyer of a certain house. While he is considering the matter, the seller uses strong mental suggestion to get the buyer to sign the order. Unless the buyer is familiar with this sort of thing, he may be forced to act against his better judgment. This practice of mental coercion is actually criminal, although it is not currently a legal offense. It is practiced in various ways, but the one who suffers most is the one who practices the method, and not its victims. Nemesis awaits all those who abuse their mental powers in this way. We can never work against the laws of life, without suffering for it very severely. The mental malpractice which I have described, is completely opposed to the internal law of cooperation already mentioned, and therefore, brings with it disorder and suffering. Chapter 12. The first steps. Who hath despised the day of small things? Zechariah 4:10. We cannot become adepts of right thinking and thought control all at once. We all have to grow from small beginnings, gradually increasing in strength and status. In other words, we all have to start in a seemingly small and humble way. When I say seemingly, I mean it on purpose. Because although it may seem insignificant, the act of deliberately thinking thoughts opposite to what our feelings and lower nature impel us to think is actually a grandiose undertaking. And if we succeed, it is an enormous achievement. It may seem a small thing to freely think thoughts of goodwill about someone who has wronged or displeased us, but in reality, it is a tremendous thing and of eternal importance. If we merely yield to the impulses of our earthly nature, we remain on a par with the beasts, allying ourselves with mortality, death, and decay. But if we we have thoughts of goodwill, we enter the path of liberation and freedom, which has no end, and reaches to the stars. It may seem a small thing to deliberately think pure and noble thoughts, rather than sensual thoughts. However, it is in reality a great achievement, because thoughts of the latter kind form the very root of man's unhappiness, weakness, and unhappiness. Similarly, it may seem insignificant to have thoughts of strength and overcoming in the face of apparent defeats and failures. However, it is not so trivial after all, since it depends largely on it, the success of our life. It may seem a small thing to deliberately think about God and eternal things, instead of thinking about mortality and temporal things. However, doing so is important, because only then can we enter into eternal life, making us one with that which knows no decay. It may seem a small thing to deliberately think of unity and oneness with the source of all light and life, rather than as separate and solitary. But this too is important, for so we enter into the realization of truth. It may seem a small thing to deliberately think of health, wholeness, and joy of life, instead of dwelling on sickness, disease, and death. But the results of such thinking are far-reaching, for our health depends largely upon it, and without health, we can accomplish very little. But while it is true that we are engaged in a great adventure, we must begin in a small way, satisfying ourselves at first with small achievements. That is, satisfied in one sense, but not in another. We have to be satisfied if at the beginning we can win seemingly small victories, simply because it is impossible to win bigger victories. But in our heart we long for greater things, and we intend to achieve them when we are strong enough. The better part of us, which is eternal and heavenly, and which is nourished by right thinking, in harmony with the laws and practices of heaven itself, is at first but a weak baby, so to speak. The lower part of us that is natural, i.e., belonging to the lower nature, and the opposite of heavenly, is strong and well grown. So how does the weak baby of the goodness and celestial nature overcome the strong tyrant of the lower one? He cannot do it by himself. It would fail, were it not for the fact that we can draw upon inexhaustible sources of life and power. Whenever we raise our thoughts, above the things of time and sense, into the eternal realms of the good, the beautiful and the true, we open ourselves to receive, an influx of divine life and power. Whenever we think thoughts, which are heavenly and strong in character, instead of those which are diabolical or weak, we ally ourselves with heaven. And then all the divine forces hasten to supply and help us. Though the new and heavenly nature is weak, while the old is strong, the former will prevail in the long run, if we are steadfast and persevering, in raising our thoughts to higher and better things. We must think the best thoughts possible, in spite of the pretensions of the old established habit of thinking. Finally, the new nature swallows up, so to speak, the old nature, but it is a long and protracted struggle. What we call right thinking is not simply having positive thoughts instead of negative ones. It is this and much more. Right thinking has different meanings for each person. For the beginner, it consists of having positive thoughts instead of negative ones, along with a call to heaven for help. Negative thinking, and its corresponding positive opposite, are the negative and positive poles of the same thing. We can live at one extreme or the other, depending on our thoughts. Here follows a train of negative thought, in a column, along with a positive opposite that counteracts it, which I hope will serve as a key for future right thinking and overcoming. Negative thought or suggestion. Life is bad and cruel. What is the terrible thing or evil that can affect me at any time? Failure, bankruptcy, job loss, illness, accidents. Positive thought or affirmation. Life is good, and always strives to bring me the greatest good. No evil can come near me, nothing can harm or destroy me. The divine blessing rests upon all my affairs, the blessing that enriches, and adds no sorrow. God's life fills me with health, strength, and joy of life. If you were to sit and meditate on the negative train of thought, especially if you were in the midst of a first-class worry, the result would be that your fears would increase. And at best, you would become depressed. If, on the other hand, you meditate on and affirm the phrases listed in the right-hand column, you will find that you become stronger, ready again for the battle of life. Not only that, but if you allow the negative chain of thoughts to attract your attention and sink into your mind, then you allow yourself to accept the adverse suggestion, which in turn can bring the feared things into actual manifestation. If on the other hand, you attach yourself to and affirm the positive thoughts shown in the second column, then the evil suggestion is expelled, and the positive, life-giving truth is put in its place. He who can do this becomes strong and firm, while the things he affirms become, in time, manifest in his life and experience. Every day, one should regularly devote some time to meditate in silence, last thing at night, or early in the morning, on the positive thoughts mentioned above, and on others like them. But during the day it is equally necessary to drive away adverse suggestion, and in this case, it should be done quickly. Meditation would be too long to use in the midst of the hustle and bustle of daily life. What is needed is a brief affirmation, which will strike the evil suggestion on the head, and replace it by a positive statement of absolute truth. Therefore, we can deal with the various suggestions of evil as follows. Suggestions of evil: sickness, disease, discomfort, poverty, penury, failure, hatred, resentment. Affirmations of truth. God is my health. God is my abundant and eternal supply. God is my success, or God is in me, as my power to achieve what I set out to achieve. God is love in me, He changes me, and finds His expression through me. It is no exaggeration to say that whoever puts these teachings into practice will transform his life, changing himself for the better. If our life is difficult, and our environment depressing or unpleasant, this is not what needs to be changed. The worst thing a man can do is to pray for his life to be easier and more comfortable. Whoever says, "If my circumstances were different, I could get ahead," perpetuates his misery, and binds more closely to him the chains of his slavery. We should never ask for tasks equal to our strengths, but strengths equal to our tasks. It is we who must change, not our circumstances. We have to overcome our circumstances and limitations, growing beyond them. When we change, our circumstances and our environment change accordingly. We can only build our character to the extent that we overcome our thinking.
Thank you for embarking on this enlightening journey with us. May the wisdom of Henry Thomas Hamblin continue to inspire and guide you as you harness the incredible power of your thoughts to manifest your dreams and create the life you truly desire. Farewell. And may your journey towards self-discovery and empowerment be filled with endless possibilities and profound transformation.